present the two dependent variables that we're using in our project, and then some results regarding the relationship between the independent variable and the dependent variable. As Mike was saying before me, this is the result of a teamwork, and he talked about the people from this university that helped him building what we just saw. From the European part of the team, it's also the result of a teamwork involving also Lucy and Christian Handke from Erasmus University, myself in Barcelona, and Bernat Coma also in Barcelona. What I'm going to present is basically two things. The first one is how we generated the data in terms of the dependent variable, and secondly, the main models that we fitted as in order to show you some preliminary results. The main dependent variable is how much science has been produced for each country each year in terms of data mining or text and data mining research. So in order to get this data, we carried out a massive search from the Scopus dataset through the API of Scopus, and trying to overcome some of the limits or the limitations that Scopus puts in this kind of endeavor. We had to chunk our searches in small batches of 5,000 documents, and finally we could gather a whole data set of 1.5 million documents or articles that deal with somehow with data mining or text and data mining. So this search was based on keywords or key terms, and these terms were gathered following two different strategies. The first one was a classic manually validated strategy, looking at tables of contents and of several manuals and books on text and data mining and finding these kind of keywords. And then we also used ChatGPT to retrieve what kind of terms could be reasonable to assume that they are related to data mining. So we extracted those terms through the API, as I said, and this required several iterations of the process because several mistakes or errors were coming up through the whole process. And I would like to thank Bernat Coma for that matter, because he's the engineer of the team, and he managed to at least give us finally a complete data set. So the main terms included in this search are these ones, and there are some of the obvious candidates such as data mining, text data mining, or text mining, things like that. But then we also included some terms that were used mainly in the beginning of the 2000s and in the late 1990s that were related with computational linguistics and such as stemming or lemmatization, things that were quite popular at that time and that were actually very, very, very common in this kind of research. So as I said, the results are around 1.5 million documents covering the 1990-2020 period. For each document of those 1.5 million documents, we do have quite a rich range of information. So we have like the unique ID that Scopus uses for each document, and then all the information regarding the author's affiliation, the different classifications used by Scopus to classify those documents in subjects and sub-subjects and scientific areas and disciplines and all that, the number of references that each paper contains, the number of citations that each document has, so all the different internal information about the documents that Scopus uses to build, for instance, all the metrics regarding the influence or the impact that each paper has or each author has in their own metrics. And then separately, we also gathered the total scientific output for all the countries for each year from the same database. So Scopus also allowed us to get data that gave us the idea of so how much science each country produces each year. So with those different sources of data in our hands, we could build also the share that the TDM research represents over the whole scientific output of each country. This is the representation of the evolution of TDM papers, then the absolute number of data mining papers each year for the whole period. And as you can see, we've experienced like an exponential growth in this kind of research, and peaking at 200,000 papers produced, data mining papers produced in 2020, which is the highest of our history. It is good that we started the database in 1990, because this actually is the year in which this kind of research actually started. So regarding our data, actually the number of papers produced, data mining papers produced in 1990 were actually very, very close to zero. So we can cover the whole period in which this discipline or area of study has been going on. This is a table of some of the most productive countries in data mining papers, which are led by China, the United States, and India, and then they are followed rather behind by other countries. And we can explain the evolution of these three countries across time, because the role of China has been growing only recently. So this kind of research was led clearly by the United States until quite recently, but then in the middle of the second decade of the 2000s, it was surpassed by China, and now China just exploded in terms of DTM.
How do you deal with co-authorships?
Good question. No, at this moment we just count the country of the first author of the paper, the main affiliation. But we have to think about how to deal with that, because of course this and actually in this area of study there are several papers, well, thousands of them, that are co-authored, but lots of them are authored by people from the same countries. So the first thing that we did regarding our results is to come back to our former classification that Mike was citing, that was mainly done by Lucy Guibault here and helped by Christian also, Handke. And so in a previous paper, we covered the top 30 economies in the world, and we built a classification of similar to Mike's in terms of how open were the legislation of each country regarding the use of the data mining techniques and the download and the use of information. And then we built like 4 categories, going from the consent required, probably not required, and the last one, which was not required, that I just collapsed into the probably not required because it only represented 6 observations across the whole period regarding the UK and Japan at certain moments. So the most frequent category here was the consent required, and the least frequent was the most open kind of legislation. So the first thing that we did here is to test Mike's score system to our former classification to see whether there had been, with 2 completely independent coding teams trying to code the same thing, although for different sizes of countries and for different periods, whether they were actually coding the same thing. So in a sense, we actually tested for the phase validity and reliability of the coding system. So in the table below, you can see the average score of Mike's categorization following the 3 categories that we built previously, and actually the results are quite reasonable. So countries that are less open score lower in Mike's score, and countries that are more open in terms of legislation score higher in that score. I also fitted a model of the 2 variables using Mike's score as the dependent variable and our former classification as the main independent variable. And as you can see here, the predicted values of Mike's scores follow exactly the same logic, and actually the confidence intervals are quite narrow, which is quite good in terms of the amount of variability that you can find within each of the categories. Regarding the models, we fitted basically 3 different models, 2 linear models with 2 dependent variables. The first one, we were using the share of data mining papers over the total output of each country each year as the dependent variable in order to control for the size of the country or the total amount of research and things like that. Then we fitted another linear model using the total data mining output as the dependent variable. And then we fitted another model, a Poisson model, that is specially designed to deal with count data. And we used also the total amount of data mining research, but then using the total amount of scientific production as the offset variable, which is a form or a way to control for this information, which is also very useful. We fitted multi-level models, which is a way to, in this kind of data that are hierarchical in structures, so that the count of papers are nested within countries and within years, so it follows a clear hierarchy. And we fitted multi-level models that help us deal with this kind of hierarchy and control for the specificities of each country and each year. And we used the country and the years as a main grouping variables. And then we first fitted a model with no control variables, but then for the rest of the models we used GDP per capita as a control variable, the population size, the level of rule of law, which is the indicator created by the World Bank. Well, all this data came from the World Bank indicators and were merged into our data set, and then also the total scientific output when the model required that. So these are the main results. I will not bother you with all the coefficients, but the first column represents the first model in which we just used Mike's score as the main independent variable. And as you can see, if you compare that model with the second column, which is the same model but using the control variables, the coefficients do not change very much. Actually, when you control for GDP per capita, population, and all that stuff, the actual coefficient of Mike's score is a little bit higher. And then what this score tells us is that when a country, the average country, switches from, for instance, the value 1 to the value 2 in Mike's score, the average increase in the share of data mining papers is around 2.4 units. So in the third model, we fitted also a linear model, but using the total number of data mining papers as a dependent variable, and results are quite similar. They are positive. And then finally, these results are also supported by the Poisson model, which tells us exactly the same story. So as much as we fit different models and using some different independent variables or control variables, we mostly find exactly the same results, which is rather positive in that sense. So the predicted effects of changes in Mike's score can be represented with this graphic, and as we can see here, those countries that score lower in the categorization then also present lower amounts of rates of data mining papers, and then this level of production increases when they become more open and so forth. Okay, so that's the same, but using the data mining output, and that's it. Thank you very much.